The unseen target. Ethan Cross stood on the tarmac of a bustling airport, staring at the gleaming fuselage of his private jet. He was accustomed to the privileges of wealth, the luxury, the ease, and the ability to navigate life without obstructions. As the founder and CEO of Crossair, one of the world's leading airline companies, he had ascended from a young man with dreams to a global business titan. But today, as he prepared to board a flight for a crucial business meeting, he sensed that something was off. The world outside his bubble seemed distant and hostile, like the air just before a storm. Ethan's executive team was already settled inside the jet, engaged in a spirited discussion about a forthcoming multi-billion-dollar merger. The deal was poised to reshape the aviation industry, securing Crossair's dominance in international travel. He had spent months negotiating with Aerotech, a company that could propel his business to new heights. But while the team's excitement was palpable, Ethan's thoughts drifted elsewhere. His unease began with a series of small things. The glance of a security officer at the terminal, the barely concealed murmurs from airport staff, the way people seemed to react when they recognized him. Ethan had built Crossair on the principles of equality and opportunity, hiring people from all backgrounds and cultures. Yet today, he felt the weight of judgment on his shoulders. He brushed it off, reminding himself that success often attracted envy. "Focus, Ethan," he muttered under his breath. He straightened his tie and began the familiar walk up the steps to his jet. His CFO, Mary, glanced up as he entered the cabin. "Ethan, we need to finalize the approach for tomorrow's negotiation," she said, her tone urgent. "Aerotech's board is getting restless. If we don't act fast, they could pull the deal." Ethan nodded, trying to shake off the lingering anxiety. The stakes were high. This merger would secure Crossair's place at the top. But a knot of worry remained in his gut, hard to ignore. As the plane began to taxi for takeoff, the feeling of foreboding only deepened. His mind wandered back to the struggles he had faced to get here, the relentless discrimination, the systemic barriers, and the naysayers who had doubted his abilities. Ethan had risen above them all, proving that nothing could stop him. But some of those same forces still existed in the shadows, waiting for him to falter. The flight progressed smoothly until the plane encountered turbulence. The sudden jolt startled everyone, and Tom, the head of operations, laughed nervously. "Is this turbulence a bad omen or what?" The comment elicited uneasy chuckles from the team, but Ethan wasn't laughing. He forced a smile, but inside, a sense of dread gnawed at him. This deal was more than a business transaction. It was personal. Crossair was his legacy, his proof that he had overcome the odds stacked against him as a black man in a predominantly white, high-powered industry. Now, at the peak of his success, the stakes felt higher than ever. The turbulence subsided, and soon the jet began its descent toward the airport. Ethan stared out of the window as the city below came into view, his thoughts now fixed on the negotiation ahead. He had always been a shrewd businessman, capable of reading people and situations with precision. But today, something felt different. As the wheels touched down, Ethan exhaled deeply, ready to step back into his world of power and influence. But as the jet taxied to a stop, he noticed something strange. A police officer was waiting at the terminal, standing rigidly near the exit stairs with a stern expression on his face. "What's going on?" Mary asked, her brow furrowed as she looked out the window. Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. The moment he stepped off the jet, the officer approached, his demeanor cold and authoritarian. "Mr. Cross?" the officer asked, his voice sharp. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, trying to mask his confusion. "Is there a problem?" The officer didn't answer the question. Instead, he motioned for Ethan to follow. "You need to come with me, sir. We have some questions for you." "Questions? About what?" Ethan's stomach churned with anger and disbelief. He had never been treated like this before, certainly not in an airport where he owned part of the airline. "I have a meeting to attend," Ethan said, his voice steady. but his patience thinning. "Not anymore. You don't," the officer sneered, grabbing Ethan's arm in a rough, controlling grip. "Follow me. Now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the stares of passers-by, their judgment heavy in the air. He was no longer the powerful CEO. He was just another black man being humiliated in public. The officer's grip tightened as he led Ethan toward a waiting police car, and the whispers of onlookers followed them like a shadow. "Billionaire," someone muttered. "Criminal," another voice hissed. Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something deeper. He could sense the officer's barely concealed hostility, the prejudice in his eyes. Ethan had fought against this his entire life, and here he was again, being reduced to a stereotype. As they reached the police car, Ethan turned to the officer. "I want to know why I'm being detained." The officer's lips curled into a sneer. "You'll find out soon enough, Mr. Cross. Just know that you're not above the law. Your kind never is." The words stung more than Ethan had expected. He had spent years working to be recognized for his accomplishments, not the color of his skin. But here, under the oppressive glare of the airport lights, he felt like nothing had changed. "I'll have my legal team on this immediately," Ethan said, his voice taut with restrained fury. "This is a mistake, and I'm going to prove it." The officer chuckled as he opened the car door. "Sure, Mr. Cross. Whatever you say." As Ethan was pushed into the back of the police car, his mind raced. This wasn't just about him. It was about everything he had built. His success, his reputation, and the respect he had fought so hard to earn were now on the line. And as the car sped away from the terminal, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Someone, somewhere, was trying to take it all away. The trap tightens. Ethan Cross sat alone in a small fluorescent-lit interrogation room, the sterile white walls around him closing in with each passing minute. The room was a far cry from the opulent settings he was used to: plush boardrooms, first-class lounges, and five-star hotels. Now he was surrounded by harsh metal furniture and the oppressive buzz of old lights overhead. It was a jarring contrast, and the cold, clinical environment seemed designed to strip away his status, leaving him feeling small and vulnerable. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but his mind was racing. Why had he been detained without explanation? What kind of questions did they have for him? And more importantly, why did it feel like this was something personal, something targeted? The door opened with a creak, breaking the suffocating silence. Officer Daniels walked in, his face wearing a smug expression that made Ethan's skin crawl. Daniels was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a grizzled look, his uniform crisp and pressed, his badge gleaming under the flickering lights. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, deliberate, almost predatory, as though he enjoyed the power he held in this room. Daniels sat across from Ethan, tossing a thin folder onto the table between them. He didn't speak at first, just leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied Ethan with a look of barely concealed contempt. The silence stretched out, and Ethan resisted the urge to fidget under the officer's gaze. Finally, Daniels broke the silence. "You're probably wondering why you're here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's an understatement. I want to know why I was detained without cause. I want to speak to my lawyer." Daniels smirked, leaning forward just slightly. "Oh, don't worry, you'll get your call. But first, we got a few things to clear up. You see, Mr. Cross, in here, you're not some big-shot CEO. You're just another suspect." "Suspect?" Ethan couldn't hide the incredulity in his voice. "Suspect for what? I haven't done anything wrong. This is clearly a mistake." Daniels' smirk deepened. "That's what they all say. But let me ask you this. Do you think just because you've got money, you can buy your way out of everything? That your status makes you untouchable?" Ethan forced himself to remain calm, though anger was simmering just beneath the surface. He had dealt with people like Daniels before, men who wielded power with arrogance, men who saw people like him as less than. He had risen above their bigotry his entire life, but sitting in this room, Ethan felt the weight of their prejudice pressing down on him again. "I'm not here to discuss my background or my money," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I want to know why I've been detained." Daniel's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment, there was something darker in his eyes, a flash of malice that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "You think you're in control here, don't you?" Daniel said, his voice low, almost mocking. "That just because you're some hotshot airline owner, you can snap your fingers and make this all go away." Ethan leaned forward, his patience wearing thin. "This is a serious violation of my rights. If you don't have a reason for detaining me, I'll make sure this entire department is held accountable." Daniel's smile widened, but it was devoid of any humor. "Accountable? You think we're afraid of you, Cross? You think your money and lawyers can protect you in here?" He shook his head slowly. "You're in a world where none of that matters. Out there, sure, you've got your fancy jet and your billion-dollar deals, but in here, you're nothing." Ethan's fists clenched under the table. He had spent his entire life working twice as hard, overcoming twice as many obstacles, all because of people like Daniels who thought they could put him in his place. He wasn't about to let this officer, or anyone else, tear down everything he had built. "I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish by keeping me here," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But I promise you, this is going to blow up in your face." Daniels leaned back, a casual grin playing on his lips. "We'll see about that." Ethan watched as Daniels picked up the folder and began flipping through its pages, his movements deliberate, as if trying to intimidate. After a few moments, Daniels stopped and tapped a page with his finger. "You've been making some pretty big waves lately, haven't you? That merger you're working on with Aerotech. Big deal. A lot of money involved. A lot of competition." Ethan's brow furrowed. He knew where this was going. He had been in the business long enough to recognize when someone was trying to rattle them, to plant seeds of doubt. "What are you getting at?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone neutral. Daniels looked up from the folder, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and cruelty. "I'm saying, Mr. Cross, that maybe you've made a few enemies along the way. Maybe someone doesn't like the way you've been throwing your weight around in the industry." Ethan's mind raced. Enemies. Sure, he had competitors. Every successful businessman did. But to go this far, to have him detained under some false pretense, it didn't make sense. Unless this wasn't just about business. For a moment, a memory flashed through Ethan's mind. A few months back, during an industry event, he had encountered Charles Whitman, the CEO of one of Crossair's fiercest competitors. Whitman had been smug, openly antagonistic, and they had exchanged harsh words about the future of the aviation industry. But could Whitman have orchestrated this? Could he really be behind what was happening now? "You think this is about a business rival?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes at Daniels. "You're telling me someone set this up because they're threatened by me?" Daniels shrugged, the smile never leaving his face. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just karma catching up to you. You've been playing hardball for a long time, Mr. Cross. Maybe someone finally decided to play back." Ethan's anger flared again, but this time, there was something else. Fear. If this really was orchestrated, if someone had pulled strings to get him detained, then they were playing a game far more dangerous than he had anticipated. And worse, they were using the legal system to do it. "Let me make this clear," Ethan said, his voice low and deadly serious. "If this is some kind of setup, I will find out who's behind it. And when I do, they'll regret ever coming after me." Daniels leaned forward again, his smile fading into something colder. "Good luck with that. But while you're figuring out who your enemies are, you'll be spending some time here. You're not going anywhere until we say so." Ethan's heart raced, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt a genuine sense of panic. This wasn't just an overzealous cop. This was something bigger, something coordinated. He was trapped, and whoever had orchestrated this was playing a long game. Daniel stood up, gathering the folder under his arm. "You'll get your phone call soon enough," he said, heading toward the door. "But don't expect it to help you much." As the door clicked shut behind the officer, leaving Ethan alone in the cold, fluorescent-lit room, he realized just how deep the conspiracy against him might run. This wasn't just about a business deal. It was personal. And whoever was behind it had just made the biggest mistake of their life. Enemies in the shadows. The phone rang twice before Sarah Caldwell, Ethan's attorney, answered in her sharp, no-nonsense tone. Despite the tension in the air, hearing her voice brought Ethan a slight sense of relief. Sarah had been by his side for years, navigating the legal intricacies of his business empire. If anyone could help him out of this mess, it was her. "Ethan, I got your message," Sarah said, her voice steady. "What's going on?" "You sounded rattled." Ethan glanced around the small, claustrophobic room before speaking. "Sarah, I'm being detained. They haven't charged me with anything, but this feels like a setup. Something bigger's going on." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Detained? Where are you right now?" "I'm in some police station near the airport. It's not about anything I've done. They haven't even told me why I'm here. They're just holding me. And from the way this officer was acting, it's clear this isn't random." Sarah's voice grew sharper. "This sounds like an abuse of power. They can't detain you without probable cause. I'll get on it immediately. But Ethan, I need you to think carefully. Have you had any threats recently? Any competitors acting unusually aggressive? You've been making some high-stakes moves in the aviation industry. Someone might be trying to put you in check." Ethan sighed and leaned his head back against the cold wall. "I've been running through every possible angle. No direct threats that I can think of, but there are always tensions in the business. The Aerotech merger is causing waves. A deal like that could reshape the entire industry, and there are people who don't want to see it happen. But would someone really go this far?" Sarah's voice was firm. "In our line of work? Absolutely. This could be corporate sabotage on a new level. If someone can make you look bad enough, it could derail the merger. Not to mention what it would do to your reputation." Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the growing headache. "I thought about that, but this feels personal too. The officer, Daniels, he's got this vendetta. He's been talking to me like I don't deserve to be here, like I don't deserve what I've built." "Racism," Sarah said bluntly, without missing a beat. "You've dealt with it before, but this sounds like it's more than just one cop on a power trip. It could be both, a personal grudge being exploited by someone in the shadows." Ethan's mind raced as Sarah's words sunk in. He had seen firsthand how powerful business competitors could be when they were threatened, but weaponizing the law to ruin him was a whole new level of underhanded. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that someone could be pulling the strings behind this entire situation. "Look, I need you to find out what's happening from the outside," Ethan said, the urgency rising in his voice. "I have a feeling this isn't just about me. Someone is trying to take me down, and they're using the system to do it. I need you to dig into who might have the power to pull off something like this. Follow the money, see if there are any unusual transactions, connections between Daniels and anyone in the industry." "I'll get my team on it immediately," Sarah replied. "We'll run through all the possibilities. Competitors, disgruntled partners, anyone with something to gain from discrediting you. But Ethan, you need to keep your head down for now. Don't provoke these officers, especially not this Daniels guy. If this is a coordinated attack, you don't want to give them any more ammunition." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand. Just don't let them box me in here. I've spent too long building everything up to let someone tear it down like this." Sarah's tone softened slightly, a rare occurrence for the hard-edged attorney. "We're not going to let that happen. I've got your back. I'll call you as soon as I have more information. After the call ended, Ethan set the phone down, his mind swirling with the possible implications of what Sarah had said. Corporate sabotage, a personal vendetta, or maybe even both. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just one rogue cop. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure Ethan Cross was not only detained but humiliated. He thought back to recent events. The past few months had been a whirlwind of high-stakes negotiations, media appearances, and maneuvering to finalize the Aerotech merger. It was the kind of deal that could shift the balance of power in the aviation industry, making Crossair a dominant force on the global stage. But it had also made him a target. His mind drifted back to the last meeting he had with Charles Whitman, the CEO of Orion Airways, one of Crossair's biggest competitors. The man was old school, ruthless, and unrelenting in his efforts to maintain his market share. Whitman had been vocal about his opposition to the merger, publicly decrying it as a monopolistic power grab that would destroy competition in the industry. Behind closed doors, however, his tactics had been more insidious. At that meeting, Whitman had hinted at using political connections to throw roadblocks in Crossair's path. Ethan had brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to desperate talk from a man who knew his empire was crumbling. But now, in the cold light of this police station, those words echoed in his mind with new significance. Could Whitman really be behind this? Could he have leveraged his connections to orchestrate this nightmare? And if so, how far did those connections reach? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the door swinging open again. Daniels reappeared, his smirk still plastered across his face. But this time, he was accompanied by another man, someone Ethan hadn't seen before. The newcomer was younger, dressed in a sharp suit that contrasted starkly with the grim surroundings of the station. His slicked back hair and polished demeanor gave him the air of a corporate shark, not a law enforcement officer. Daniels motioned for the man to sit down across from Ethan. "Mr. Cross, this is Mr. Lambert. Well, let's just say he's here to help smooth things out for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, instantly on guard. Lambert sat down, folding his hands on the table in a gesture that was supposed to be disarming, but only made Ethan more suspicious. "Mr. Cross," Lambert began, his voice smooth and professional. "I'm here on behalf of certain interested parties who want to see this matter resolved quickly and quietly." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Interested parties? Who exactly are you representing?" Lambert gave a tight-lipped smile. "Let's just say that some of your competitors have concerns about your recent activities. They'd prefer if you reconsidered your position in the upcoming merger with Aerotech." Ethan's blood ran cold. This was it, the shadowy conspiracy Sarah had hinted at. Whoever Lambert was working for had gone from subtle threats to outright coercion. They weren't just trying to stop the merger. They were trying to destroy him. "And if I don't reconsider?" Ethan asked, his voice low and dangerous. Lambert's smile didn't waver. "Then I'm afraid this situation will get much worse before it gets better. But if you're willing to walk away from the deal, we can make all of this go away. You'll be back on your jet. No charges, no public scandal. It's a generous offer, Mr. Cross." Ethan leaned forward, locking eyes with Lambert. "Tell whoever sent you that I don't back down from threats. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I'm not about to let some backroom deal destroy everything I've built." Lambert's smile faltered for the first time, and a shadow of frustration crossed his face. He stood up, straightening his suit. "Suit yourself, Mr. Cross. But don't say we didn't give you a way out." As Lambert walked out, Ethan's mind raced. This was no longer about business, it was about survival. Someone was pulling the strings, and they were willing to go to any lengths to bring him down. But Ethan wasn't about to roll over. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. Unmasking the puppeteers. As Lambert's footsteps faded into the corridor, Ethan remained seated, staring at the empty space where the man had been. His mind raced with thoughts, piecing together the new puzzle that had just fallen into his lap. He knew now, without a doubt, that this was no random police harassment. This was a calculated attack, and Lambert's words confirmed it. His competitors weren't just circling, they were launching a full-scale offensive, one designed to ruin him before the ink dried on the Aerotech merger. Ethan rose from the uncomfortable metal chair, pacing the cramped interrogation room. He ran his hands through his short, graying hair, feeling the pressure mount with each passing second. A part of him wanted to lash out, to confront the officers and demand answers. But another part of him knew he needed to keep his cool. Any misstep could turn this situation into a disaster. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open once more. This time, it wasn't Daniels or Lambert. Instead, a young officer with kind eyes stepped in. "Mr. Cross, we've received word from your attorney. You'll be released soon," he said, his tone much gentler than Daniels' condescending sneer. Ethan nodded, not quite trusting this sudden change in tone. "What's the catch?" he asked, wary of any false promises. "No catch," the officer replied. "There was no formal charge. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Ethan's eyes narrowed. A misunderstanding. After hours of detention, threats, and veiled ultimatums, he could smell the cover-up from a mile away. Lambert and his shadowy backers were pulling strings, releasing him just enough to make him sweat, but not enough to absolve him of the stain they tried to put on his reputation. This was a warning shot, clear and deliberate. Without another word, Ethan followed the officer out of the interrogation room. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the bleak hallway. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he inhaled deeply, grateful to be free, but acutely aware that the battle was far from over. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw Sarah's name flash across the screen. "Ethan, are you all right?" Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the city. "I'm out," Ethan replied. "But this is far from over. Lambert paid me a visit. He offered to make all of this disappear if I backed out of the Aerotech deal." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was laced with fury. "So, they're playing dirty. I had a feeling it might come to this. I've been digging into Daniel's background like you asked. Turns out he's got some pretty strong ties to Orion Airways." "Whitman," Ethan said, the name bitter on his tongue. Charles Whitman, CEO of Orion Airways and his primary competitor, had never been one to play fair. If anyone had the resources and motive to pull off this kind of stunt, it was Whitman. But how far did his reach go? And what was his ultimate plan? "I'm not surprised," Ethan continued. "Whitman's been desperate ever since the Aerotech deal came on the table. He knows it's the beginning of the end for Orion. If this merger goes through, we'll be the largest airline in the world. He can't compete with that. And he knows it," Sarah added. "I've also been tracking some unusual financial transactions, money being funneled into shell companies that have ties to key political players. I wouldn't be surprised if Whitman is using his connections to fuel this whole thing." Ethan's stomach twisted at the thought. Corruption, power plays, bribes, it wasn't new to him. But this was more personal than anything he'd dealt with before. He wasn't just fighting for his company, he was fighting for his legacy. "I need more," Ethan said, his voice low and determined. "If Whitman's behind this, I need solid proof. We can't just play defense. We need to hit back hard. We need to expose him for what he is." "I'm already on it," Sarah replied. "I've got my team gathering intel on Whitman's network. But Ethan, this is going to be a long game. He's got deep pockets and powerful friends. If we go after him, we need to be prepared for a fight on every front. Legal, media, political. He won't go down without swinging." Ethan stood on the curb outside the police station, watching as the city moved around him. Cars zipped by, unaware of the battle waging beneath the surface of their everyday lives. This was his world. The world of billion-dollar deals and cutthroat competition. But now the stakes were higher than ever. Whitman wasn't just trying to beat him in business. He was trying to ruin him personally, to destroy everything Ethan had spent a lifetime building. "Let's play the long game," Ethan said, his voice cold with resolve. "If Whitman wants a war, then a war he'll get. But we're going to be smarter, and we're going to win." Sarah paused for a moment before responding. "All right, I'll keep digging, but you need to stay low for a while. They're not done with you yet. Daniels and Lambert may have let you walk for now, but they'll be watching your every move. Be careful, Ethan." "Always," he replied before hanging up. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. This was no longer just about the Aerotech merger. It was about survival, both for his company and for himself. As he hailed a car to take him back to his hotel, Ethan's mind shifted to strategy. He needed to figure out who else might be involved in this conspiracy. Whitman was the obvious puppet master, but he couldn't have done this alone. The reach of this scheme extended beyond a simple police station. It was rooted in political alliances, legal loopholes, and corporate sabotage. If Whitman had the influence to pull all these strings, then Ethan needed to find a way to sever those connections. But first, he needed to clean up the mess that had already been made. The media would get wind of his detainment soon enough, and when they did, there would be headlines, speculation, and rumors about what had happened. He had to control the narrative before it spiraled out of control. Back at his hotel, Ethan immediately called a crisis PR firm he had worked with in the past. They were the best in the business, known for handling delicate situations with the utmost precision. By the time he arrived in the hotel lobby, a full media strategy was already being drafted. Walking up to his suite, Ethan's thoughts turned to Whitman once more. The man was ruthless, but Ethan had underestimated just how far Whitman was willing to go. This wasn't just about outbidding him for a contract or trying to poach his clients. This was a full-scale takedown attempt, one that aimed to dismantle Ethan's entire empire piece by piece. But Ethan wasn't new to this game. He had built his fortune by outsmarting rivals, by staying 2 steps ahead. This time would be no different, even if the stakes were higher. He wasn't just fighting for the Aerotech merger. He was fighting for his name, his legacy, and everything he stood for. As he sat down at the desk in his hotel room, Ethan pulled out a pen and a pad of paper. He began jotting down names, allies, and strategies. He would need every resource, every connection he had built over the years. He was facing not just Whitman, but a network of corruption and deceit that ran deep. And as the night stretched on, Ethan's resolve hardened. This wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. The trap is set. Ethan sat alone in his suite, the soft glow of the city lights flickering through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, New York buzzed with life, completely oblivious to the high-stakes game unfolding above them. His pen hovered over the notepad on his desk, the names and ideas already scrawled across it like a battlefield map. Whitman's name stood at the top of the list, circled multiple times. Below it were question marks next to Lambert and Daniels, 2 pawns in Whitman's game. But pawns were only part of the larger conspiracy. Ethan knew Whitman wasn't working alone. This whole ordeal felt too sophisticated, too far-reaching to be just about a rival CEO's envy. There were others in play, hidden behind layers of deniability and influence. He could feel their shadows creeping around him, unseen but very present. He just needed to figure out who they were and how to expose them. As he stared at the list, his phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a secure call from Sarah. He grabbed it immediately, his tone low and firm. "What do you have?" he asked, skipping any pleasantries. Sarah's voice came through crisp and professional, but there was a slight edge of excitement behind it. "I dug deeper into Whitman's financials, like we talked about. He's been laundering money through shell corporations, and I've identified a few key figures linked to them: lobbyists, political donors, and even a couple of judges. It's a sophisticated operation, Ethan. He's built a fortress of influence." Ethan gritted his teeth. "So it's not just business." "No," Sarah continued. "This is bigger. Whitman's using his corporate resources to fund political campaigns and even sway legal outcomes in his favor. The officer who detained you, Daniels, he's not just a pawn. He's one of several law enforcement officers with deep ties to Whitman's organization. And it gets worse. I found evidence that some of the same politicians who supported your competitors in the past are now backing Whitman's takeover efforts. They're laying the groundwork to dismantle your empire piece by piece. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of her words sink in. He had suspected this, but hearing the full extent of Whitman's network of corruption sent a chill down his spine. So they're coming at me from every angle, legal, political, and corporate. It's not just about the Aerotech deal. They want to ruin me. Exactly, Sarah replied. This is an all-out assault, and they've been planning it for a while. I'm guessing the turbulence you faced in recent months, the sudden increase in regulatory pressure, and the negative press leaks, they were all part of this. Whitman was weakening you before the final strike. Ethan clenched his fists, the anger rising within him. So, what's the next move? How do we hit back? We've got to play this carefully, Sarah said, her voice more cautious now. You're going to need allies, powerful ones. Whitman's strength lies in his ability to hide behind others. If we want to bring him down, we need to isolate him, expose the people who are covering for him, and create enough of a public outcry that even his political connections can't protect him. But we can't go at him directly. Not yet. We need to set a trap. Ethan nodded, already seeing the path forward in his mind. How? I've got an idea, Sarah replied. You're still set to attend the merger talks with Aerotech tomorrow, right? Yeah, Ethan confirmed. They don't know about the police detainment yet. I've managed to keep it under wraps. Good, Sarah said. Here's what I'm thinking. Whitman's got someone inside Aerotech, feeding him information about the deal. We don't know who yet, but if you keep pushing the merger forward, they'll get desperate. We need to flush out his informant and bait Whitman into making a move. But we do it on our terms. Ethan's mind raced. You want to set a trap during the negotiations. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. We'll plant false information, something big enough that it'll draw Whitman out, force him to act. But we'll have to make it seem real, like you're vulnerable, like you're scrambling to save the deal. That's when Whitman will show his hand. If we time it right, we can expose him publicly, and it'll be too late for him to backpedal. Once the media gets wind of his manipulation, his entire network could crumble. Ethan liked the sound of the plan. It was dangerous, yes, but he thrived on high-stakes situations. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about survival. All right, he said. Let's do it. What's the bait? Leave that to me, Sarah replied confidently. I'll draft a false dossier, something that suggests the deal is in jeopardy because of hidden debts on your end. Whitman won't be able to resist using that to tank your merger. Once he makes his move, we'll be ready. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. It was risky, but it was the only way forward. All right, I'll handle the negotiations as usual, but I'll signal when it's time to release the bait. You just make sure everything else is in place. Consider it done, Sarah said. But Ethan, one more thing. Whitman's desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Be careful. This could turn ugly. Ethan smiled, though there was no humor in it. It's already ugly. Now we just need to make sure it ends in our favor. The next day, the conference room at Aerotech's corporate headquarters buzzed with activity. Executives shuffled in and out, preparing for the most critical meeting of the year. The Aerotech merger was a monumental deal, one that would reshape the airline industry for years to come. But as Ethan entered the sleek, modern office space, he knew that today wasn't just about business. It was about setting the trap for Whitman. His team was already seated, waiting for him. Mary, his chief financial officer, gave him a reassuring nod as he took his place at the head of the table. The Aerotech executives across from him appeared calm, but Ethan could sense a nervous energy under the surface. They were eager to close the deal, but something was holding them back, and he had a pretty good idea what it was. As the meeting began, Ethan went through the usual motions, discussing financials, market share, future strategies. Everything was perfectly in line, just as they had planned. But he kept a close eye on the Aerotech representatives, searching for any sign of Whitman's influence. He knew someone in that room was feeding information back to his rival. Hours passed, and the tension in the room thickened. Aerotech's CEO, a shrewd man named Henry Roth, finally leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Cross, we've received some concerning information about your financials," Roth said, sliding a folder across the table. Ethan glanced at it but didn't open it. He knew exactly what was inside. The false dossier Sarah had planted, the one that hinted at undisclosed debts and liquidity issues. It was the bait, and Roth had taken it. "I assure you," Ethan said calmly, "my financials are solid. Any rumors to the contrary are simply unfounded." Roth frowned, clearly unconvinced. "We'll need to see proof before we can proceed. This merger is too important to risk on uncertainties." Ethan nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Of course. I'll have my team send over the necessary documents. But let me be clear. There are forces at play here trying to sabotage this deal. You've likely been fed false information." Roth's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I'm suggesting that someone doesn't want this merger to happen, and they'll do anything to stop it. But if you're willing to trust me, I can expose them. Give me a day, and I'll show you who's really behind these rumors." Roth hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "One day, Cross. If you can't prove it by then, we're pulling out." Ethan smiled slightly, his confidence unwavering. "That's all I need." As Ethan left the building, his heart pounded in his chest. The trap was set. Now, it was only a matter of time before Whitman made his move. Back at his office, he immediately called Sarah. "It's done." Roth took the bait. "Good," Sarah replied. "Now we wait. Whitman won't be able to resist using this against you. When he does, we'll be ready." Ethan hung up the phone, feeling the tension of the last few days begin to lift. They had set the stage perfectly. Whitman was about to walk into a trap, one he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. But as he sat back in his chair, staring out at the New York skyline, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more dangerous. Whitman wouldn't go down without a fight. And when he struck back, Ethan had to be ready. Because in this game, there were no second chances. Checkmate. The night before the decisive meeting with Aerotech, Ethan Cross sat in his penthouse office, bathed in the muted glow of the city's lights. He had just finished reviewing the final preparations with Sarah, and now the wait began. They had set the perfect trap, but Ethan knew that Whitman wouldn't fall quietly. The man was too cunning, too deeply entrenched in his web of influence to go down without a fight. If this final move didn't work, Ethan's entire empire could crumble in a single day. The stakes had never been higher. He reached for a glass of bourbon, swirling the amber liquid as he stared out at the city below. It had been years since he'd been this close to the edge. Years since he had felt this fire, this primal determination to win. But there was also a deep unease, an intuition that warned him Whitman had yet to show his full hand. The phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. Sarah's voice came through, crisp but laced with urgency. "Ethan, it's happening," she said. "Whitman just leaked the dossier. It's all over the financial networks. Every outlet is running stories about your hidden debt crisis. They're calling it a scandal, speculating whether the Aerotech deal will collapse because of your financial instability." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the markets? Already reacting?" Sarah confirmed. "Shares are dropping, and investors are getting nervous. Whitman's playing dirty, just like we expected. But this is good. We've got him. He's overplayed his hand." Ethan knew the plan was working, but that didn't make it any easier to stomach. His reputation, carefully built over decades, was now being shredded in the media by lies Whitman had crafted. The next 24 hours would be the most critical of his life. Have you tracked the source? Ethan asked, his voice calm but sharp. Yes, Sarah replied. We traced the leak back to one of Whitman's shell companies. He's been sloppy, probably in his rush to take you down. We can prove he's behind the false information. Good, Ethan said, his eyes narrowing. Let's make sure the press gets that proof at the right time. Tomorrow, just before the meeting. I'll take care of it, Sarah promised. But Ethan, one more thing. We've heard rumblings that Whitman is getting desperate. There's talk that he might make a move beyond just a smear campaign. Be careful. Ethan hung up, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Desperate men did stupid things. He knew that better than anyone. Whitman had already shown he was willing to bend the law, manipulate the press, and bribe officials to get what he wanted. What if Whitman was planning something even more dangerous? Something that couldn't be undone with a well-placed news story. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Aerotex's sleek, modern headquarters, the city bustling with the usual energy outside. But inside, there was a different kind of tension in the air. Every move felt like it had weight, like the entire building was bracing for the seismic shift that was about to happen. The conference room was filled with executives, lawyers, and advisors from both sides, all here for what was supposed to be a routine finalization of the merger. But everyone knew today was far from routine. As Ethan entered the room, all eyes turned to him. The Aerotech executives, led by Henry Roth, were tense, clearly rattled by the media firestorm surrounding Ethan's alleged financial issues. Roth stood at the head of the table, his normally calm demeanor fractured by anxiety. Mr. Cross, Roth said, his voice polite but edged with suspicion. I assume you're aware of the reports circulating this morning. This is highly troubling. We can't proceed with the merger until we've addressed these concerns. Ethan took his seat, his expression unreadable. I understand, Henry. But I can assure you, those reports are nothing but false accusations orchestrated by someone with a vested interest in seeing this deal fail. Roth frowned, clearly skeptical. We've seen the dossier, Ethan. If even a fraction of it is true. It's not. Ethan cut in, his voice firm. None of it is true. In fact, I can prove it. He motioned to one of his aides, who handed Roth a sealed file. Inside is a complete breakdown of my company's financials, certified by an independent audit firm. There's no hidden debt, no liquidity crisis, but more importantly, that dossier you've seen. We've traced it back to a deliberate smear campaign orchestrated by Whitman. Roth's eyes widened as he opened the file, scanning the documents inside. You're saying Whitman is behind this? Exactly, Ethan said, leaning forward. He planted that fake dossier to undermine this deal, hoping to scare you off. He knows that if this merger goes through, my company will be too powerful for him to compete with. He's playing dirty because he's desperate. The room fell silent as Roth and the other Aerotech executives processed Ethan's words. Slowly, Roth closed the file, his expression hardening. If what you're saying is true, we'll need to move quickly to distance ourselves from Whitman. But Ethan, this is a lot to take in. We need time to verify everything. You don't have time, Ethan said sharply. Whitman's already made his move. If you hesitate, this deal will fall apart, and you'll be left vulnerable. I've already taken the necessary steps to expose him. By the end of today, the media will have proof that Whitman fabricated this entire scandal. When that happens, his empire will collapse. But if you walk away now, you'll be walking straight into his trap. Roth hesitated, clearly torn. But before he could respond, the door to the conference room burst open. One of the Aerotech lawyers hurried in, looking pale and shaken. Henry, we've just received word from the legal department, the lawyer said, his voice trembling. There's been a breach at Whitman's offices. Someone leaked internal documents showing his involvement in multiple illegal activities, including the false dossier. The press is already running with it. Whitman's under investigation by federal authorities. The entire room froze. Roth's eyes darted to Ethan, who remained calm, though inwardly he felt the surge of victory rising. Ethan didn't need to say anything. The room knew what had just happened. Whitman had been exposed, his empire on the verge of collapse. And with that, his leverage against Ethan had evaporated. Roth, regaining his composure, finally spoke. "It appears you were right, Mr. Cross. Whitman's played his last card. Let's move forward with the merger." A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but he kept his focus sharp. "Good. Let's finalize this before any more surprises." As the meeting adjourned and the final signatures were put in place, Ethan felt the weight of the last few weeks lift from his shoulders. The merger was secured, Whitman's plot had failed, and his empire was stronger than ever. But even as the ink dried on the deal, Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Whitman might be down, but there were still others lurking in the shadows, powerful players who had backed Whitman, expecting him to deliver. They wouldn't forget this defeat, and they wouldn't stop coming for him. As he exited the building, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Whitman's been arrested. It's over for now. But I've uncovered more connections. We need to talk." Ethan smiled grimly, pocketing the phone. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. With enemies like these, there was always another move to be made, another game to be played. But for now, at least Ethan Cross was still standing, and that was enough. For today.